Welcome to Firearms Friday at the Wyoming State Museum in Cheyenne. I'm firearms historian Evan Green, and if you doubt that, you need to look at my shingle that I just put up. This was a very thoughtful and kind gift from one of the collection's curators. She's a private person, so I won't mention her name, but her initials are ML, so I'm grateful for that gift. So today's episode is the third of four on the topic of Tom Horn. The two previous ones were about artifacts in the museum's collection, and this one is called The Guns of Tom Horn. And while I was doing my research, I stumbled on a couple of examples of firearms that were associated with him. And the first one I want to talk about, and we'll put up a picture, got a couple of pictures actually. It's a Colt Frontier 6-shooter in caliber 4440. So that would be this cartridge right here is a 4440, also known as 44 Winchester centerfire. So this, I'm going to use my notes so that I don't miss any of the details and perpetuate inaccuracies. There are plenty of those out there already. So engraved on the back strap of this revolver, it says Tom Horn, Scout DET, which I'm sure is Scout Detachment, 3rd U.S. Cavalry, San Carlos, Department of Arizona, 1882. I was skeptical of this when I first found it because anybody can engrave anything they want to on any firearm. But I've also found that high-end firearms auction sites like Bonham's or Rock Island Auction Company are very, very diligent in how they describe the firearm that they're putting up for auction and how they document the provenance. They want to achieve the maximum return for the seller and also for them, and their reputation is at stake. Because if they fudge on the provenance and it's later proven to be untrue, that's a blow to their reputation. So I tend to trust them over almost all of the other online firearm sites. These guys have something to lose if they don't get it right. So anyway, again, I was skeptical, but they sent this firearm to an expert in engraving, and his conclusion was that it was appropriate and probably applied very soon after the firearm was issued. It shipped from the factory in 1881. And in 1882, Tom Horn was in fact at the San Carlos Agency, which was the reservation for the Apaches. He was not a scout at this point, but the engraving doesn't say that. It only says that he's associated with that scout detachment. At the time, he was a livestock herder and a mule packer. The cavalry in those days was supported not by wagons, but by mule train carrying supplies, ammunition, and rations. So it was an important job and a hard one because the mules had to be packed every morning, packs put on the mules, and then taken off when they went into camp at night. They had to be supervised when they were grazing and protected from raids of the renegade Apaches, which was who they were chasing. So what was the Scout Detachment? I have a lot of respect for General George Crook, although he didn't perform up to standards at the Rosebud. But he was a famous and very effective Indian fighter. And he was even respected by the adversaries because they said he never lied to us. If he said something, we could take it that it was true. So in other situations, Crook had organized Native American detachments to act as scouts and trackers for his cavalry units. And that was the case here in Arizona. He said, the only way to catch a wild Apache is with another Apache. So this, I'm convinced this is probably legitimate and probably was in fact a Tom Horn revolver. The Frontier 6-shooter was always chambered in 4440, and it was the only Colt that had a name acid etched on the barrel. It was available standard from the factory with barrel lengths from 2 inches to 7.5. This one's a 7.5 inch. But you could order about anything you wanted in those days from Colt. If you wanted a 12-inch barrel, they would make one for you. So the 4440 was popular because it was also chambered in other handguns of the time, specifically the Colt single-action Army, so you could carry one set of ammunition for both your rifle and your handgun. So in 1885, or maybe 1884, Horn came to the attention of the chief of the Apache Scouts, a guy named Al Cyber. And Cyber was a pretty hardcore dude. He recognized in Tom Horn that he had experience in tracking. When he was growing up, he ditched school. Every time he crossed a rabbit track, him and his dog went looking for the rabbit. So he was an accomplished tracker, familiar with firearms, a good shot. So he became chief of scouts when Al Cyber was sidelined with medical issues. So that's the Colt Frontier 6-shooter. The next firearm I want to talk about is this 1876 Centennial rifle. Now I need to do a disclaimer. These are not Tom Horn's firearms. These are firearms from the museum's collection, and I'm showing them as an example of the firearm, in this case, a firearm that Tom Horn was known to have. We're going to post a picture here at this point, and it shows Tom Horn and 3 Apache Scouts and a guy named Mickey Free. It's clear that Tom Horn is holding a Winchester Centennial rifle model 1876. The Apache Scouts are all holding a carbine, a Springfield trapdoor carbine, which was standard issue to the cavalry. Now, these Apache Scouts were actually enrolled in the U.S. Army, and they were paid according to their rank, which could go up to sergeant major. But they were armed with these single-shot trapdoor carbines. Now, Mickey Free is the guy in the upper right-hand corner of the picture. Mickey had flaming red hair. He was part Irish and part Mexican. He was captured by the Apaches when he was 9 years old. And when that clan surrendered and went to live at the San Carlos Reservation, it became immediately apparent what a valuable person Mickey Free was, because he understood the Apache language and something of the culture, having been with them for probably 10 or 12 years. So I think he is also holding a trapdoor firearm, but I think it might be a rifle because it appears that it has a sling. And the identifying characteristic that on both Mickey's rifle and on the carbines is the shape of the breech block, where this firing pin unit raises up off the breech block to meet the hammer. So we think probably that Horn's Winchester may have been chambered in 4560. This is a 4560. This is a 4570, which the carbines were chambered for, although for the cavalry it was often issued a reduced powder charge, a 4555. So that's a 4560. The Centennial Winchester was also chambered in 4575, eventually in a 4060 and a 5095, which was a fairly powerful cartridge. And we have a Winchester 76 in that caliber in the collection. So, okay, moving right along. A Smith & Wesson 38 S&W. Tom Horn was arrested on April 9th, 1891 in Reno, Nevada, and charged with holding up a casino, an armed robbery of a casino. And when he was arrested for that, he was on the platform of the railroad station getting ready to leave town. And they seized him and his valise, and inside that valise was a Smith & Wesson .38 caliber nickel-plated revolver with a 5-inch barrel. So it was similar to this. This is a 4-inch barrel. And we'll have a picture up of one with a 5-inch barrel. And also it was interesting, again in my research, that I ran across a quote that a rancher with whom Horn lodged said that he came in off the range, unbuckled a gun belt with a big revolver on it, and took 2 smaller revolvers out of his pockets. Those may well have been Smith & Wesson revolvers, in .38 Smith & Wesson, or possibly even .32 Smith & Wesson. So here's a statement. Prior to Horn's execution, James A. Scott, a Laramie County rancher, placed one of Horn's revolvers, a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson, on exhibit in a Denver hardware store. It was stolen from the store, never recovered, current location unknown. I missed a bit about the 76. Recently, one cropped up in caliber .45-60, and the sling is marked John Coble, Bosler, Wyoming. Coble was one of Horn's employers, and they became quite fast friends over the years, and we'll see some evidence of that in a revolver I'm going to talk about later. But anyway, there's a picture of that rifle. Was it Tom Horn's? There's some people who believe it was, but again, there's no solid evidence one way or the other. Okay, moving right along. Smith & Wesson. The next picture is a Remington Model 1890 single-action revolver, also chambered in that .44-40 caliber. The Remington Model 1890 is a fairly rare handgun. There were only about 2,020 of them made between 1891 and 1896. There was only a handful engraved and very few that were engraved as a presentation. This one has an inscription engraved on the left side of the barrel that says, "Presented to Tom Horn by his friend John Coble." Has a 5 3/4 inch barrel, 2-piece smooth bone grips, and engraved in the L.D. Nimschke style, lanyard stud and a ring in the butt strap. So the Colt Frontier 6-shooter that I talked about first was sold to a private collector for $45,000. This one was sold to a private collector for $250,000. And it's a rare item because of the limited number that were produced, the limited number engraved, and the limited number that were engraved as a presentation. So it was a rare and valuable firearm even without the Horn connection. But that's a lot of money, I think. To put it in perspective, the Colt single-action revolver that Pat Garrett used to kill Billy the Kid recently sold for $6 million, an eye-watering amount. And I have mixed feelings about these firearms going to collectors because in most cases the public has lost access to view those historical items. Yeah, whatever. Okay, the next rifle is a Winchester Model 1894 in .30 Winchester centerfire, also called .30-30. Had a 26-inch round barrel, special order with a button magazine, which meant the magazine didn't extend the full length of the barrel. It stopped at the end of the forend. And this was in Horn's possession when he was arrested on January 13, 1902. Horn gave the rifle to Charles B. Irwin, who was one of his close friends and was a ranch manager for John Coble. So the rifle's well documented. It remained in the possession of the Irwin family for years. For a period of time, it was actually at the Old West Museum here in Cheyenne, out at the Cheyenne Frontier Days grounds. So Old West Museum returned it to the Irwin family, and at some point they sold it, again, at auction for $150,000. And Horn worked over the years with a guy named C.W. Doc Shores, who was a sheriff at one point in Arizona. Horn did some work as a deputy sheriff in a couple of different jurisdictions, and he and Shores were both Pinkerton operatives at the same time, about 1890, 1891. So he encountered Doc Shores in Denver and said, they were talking, and it says, Horn changed the subject to the latest rifles and said he carried a brand new 94 Winchester 30-30 caliber. Quote, Doc, ain't this new smokeless something? Added Horn. You can shoot a long way off, and that don't make no smoke. Which is important, he observed, to people in our line of work. Shores was also something of a manhunter. So anyway, this, again, sold in 2015 for $140,000. And I'm really psyched about this next revolver. It's a Colt Model 1878 double-action revolver. And this is a quote from Larry Ball. And again, I want to give a shout-out to this book by Larry Ball. It is the Encyclopedia on Tom Horn. And if you want to know more, this is the one I recommend over anything else that's been written about Horn. So, this is a quote from Ball. According to tradition, Sheriff Edwin Smalley took from Horn, at the time of his arrest, a Colt Model 1878 double-action 45 caliber revolver. So this would have been in 45 Colt caliber. This weapon is, at the time, in the possession of the Texas Ranger Hall of Fame Museum in Waco, Texas. Again, that's Larry Ball. Sheriff Smalley didn't have much law enforcement experience at this time. He was replacing a well-liked sheriff who passed away, and Smalley was appointed to that job. So Smalley was a pretty smart guy, because when he went in to arrest Horn, he reached out to shake hands, and with the other hand, he grabbed this revolver out of Horn's waistband or holster. And we've got two views of that revolver and of the holster that it came in. So I contacted the Texas Ranger Hall of Fame looking for pictures of the revolver. And they said, we no longer have it. It was on loan. It went back to the family, and they sold it. But they were so helpful at the Texas Ranger Hall of Fame. The guy got me a link to the auction site. Again, one of those high-end auction sites that had these pictures of that revolver. So the provenance is that it was sold. I don't have a date for this. Could have been as late as the 1970s, but it was sold in a sale of unclaimed evidence to Deputy D.E. Brown, who was a Laramie County Deputy Sheriff at that time. And it was passed on to Donald Everett Brown, a signed and notarized statement, and acquired by a guy named Larson, and later acquired by Jim and Theresa Earl in 1974. That one sold at auction, again to a private collector, so nobody will ever see it again. Sold for $44,000. All right, what do we got next? Okay. I just have a picture of this handgun, but it is a Browning Model 1900 in caliber 7.62 or 32 ACP. On Sunday, August 9, 1903, Horn and Driftwood Jim McLeod overpowered Deputy Richard Proctor. There was a struggle over the firearms. Horn was trying to get this Browning away from Deputy Proctor, and when it became apparent that that was going to happen, Proctor was able to put the safety on. So when Horn gained control of that semi-automatic pistol, he tried to shoot Proctor with it, but he didn't know how to take off the safety. McLeod grabbed a Winchester Model 1895 in 3040 Craig, and they both beat feet out of the jail into downtown Cheyenne. Horn tried again while he was outside to get that pistol to work, and it couldn't figure out the safety. All he knew about were revolvers, so he ended up being recaptured and were returned to the jail to await execution in a couple of months. I was kind of surprised by the prevalence of 3040 Craig firearms in southeast Wyoming at the turn of the century. One of the Miller boys, who were neighbors of the up in the Iron Mountain area, they were neighbors of the Nichols, and they were actually suspected of possibly killing Willie Nickel. But one of those boys had a 3040 Craig. And again, Driftwood Jim took one out of the jail. And also, there was the Tipton train robbery in Wyoming in 1901. And Joe LaForce led the posse in pursuit of the Wild Bunch. And the Union Pacific Railroad provided Winchester Model 1895 lever-action rifles in 3040 Craig to members of that posse. So I'm really psyched about this particular presentation, because in all of the research that I did about Tom Horn, I didn't find this list of firearms in any one place. So I think maybe it's a scoop, and I'm kind of proud of that, and I hope you all enjoy it. Thanks for watching.